Sequels are one of the most challenging ventures for game developers to pursue. Capturing lightning in a bottle once is a large feat in and of itself, and doing so twice in a row is often downright impossible. Over my many gaming years, I've seen both wildly successful continuations of beloved game series, so far as surpassing the success of their predecessor, as well as complete off-the-rails failures that do more harm than good to the game series in question. Remaking what made a successful game so successful all over again in a brand new title is a difficult task, as the sequel must both retain the essence of what made the previous game so great, while also having enough of its own unique identity to warrant being an entirely separate game as opposed to a DLC. In the roguelike sphere specifically, I actually don't have a ton of instances of knowledge about sequels. Considering the indie nature of most of the games, a lot of roguelikes I played are one of one. But one of my most favorite roguelikes of all time, Risk of Rain 2, is a sequel, and honestly, I much more so enjoy Risk of Rain 2 over its predecessor. Risk of Rain was an incredibly fun and endearing title, with great gameplay, a stunning lore-filled world, a great cast of survivors, and brilliant infusion of roguelike aspects with its own distinctive mechanics. However, the sequel took all of that and expanded immensely on everything that made the game so great. It added a full new dimension, more unique survivors, more gameplay mechanics, more environments and enemies to face, and wrapped it all in a very well done continuation of the original story. And several other roguelike titles have managed to accomplish this success, recapturing their own lightning in a bottle and providing fans with the nostalgic fun they loved in the original titles wrapped in a brand new coat of gameplay, mechanics, and story continuation. So of course, when Hades 2 released for early access, the prime thought on my mind was exactly how Supergiant would tackle the sequel. Hades was one of the most incredible roguelikes I had played, period, along with claiming tons of awards and garnering a massive fanbase, and combining this with the massive prior roguelike sequel successes such as Risk of Rain 2 or The Binding of Isaac we've seen, meant that the bar of expectations placed on Hades 2 was giant. But my Zeus, did Supergiant knock this one out of the underworld.
Anybody who spoils that show for me gets fucking banned.
Hades 2 has been absolutely dominating my schedule for the past week, to put it lightly. I've been having a blast with this game, and in many ways it has far exceeded my expectations for it going in, dare I say to the point of perfection, especially considering it's still in early access. Those of you who partook in the original Hades will feel a pretty good deal of familiarity in Hades 2, as on the surface it plays more or less identically. We follow Melenue, sister Zagreus, the protag of Hades 1, as she takes the mantle of her brother fighting through hordes of minions in various regions on the path to her main adversary, this time being the Titan Kronos. To do so, we traverse our way into the underworld, fighting through the various foes placed in our path with a variety of weapons and supplied with random boon upgrades given by the gods and goddesses of Olympus. It's a similar beaten path followed by Hades, but Hades 2 of course has its own original twists and additions blanketed in a new story, characters, and world. On that note, the first big question I had going into Hades 2 was of its world building. The story of Hades was a big draw for me, and luckily Hades 2 does a really good job of both nodding to the original game's lore while also developing a new story with its own unique characters and arc. I don't want to get into too much detail cause spoilers, but I like the storytelling just about as much as I did in Hades, which is a big compliment. And since this is still in early access, I'd want to wait until the final project to really give any solid opinion on the story itself anyway. What I can attest to is that the variety of characters in Hades 2 is awesome. We have our old comebacks with fresh new looks as well as a slew of new faces, each of which with the same amount of rich lore as the original characters from Hades. It was kinda kiddishly fun to go through the game and see all the OG Hades gods, goddesses, and other characters redesigned portraits in Hades 2, and the various nods and continuations the game laid for each of them. And the newcomers are also pretty great, again very well designed and full of dialogue and lore. I love the new bosses and hub world characters and plot characters and gods and goddesses, all of them were equally well created, drawn and voice acted with a ton of good dialogue that I've still barely even scratched the surface of in my near 10 hours of playtime. More than meeting my expectations set by the story, characters, and dialogue content of Hades. Another equally big draw to the original game and a big expectation I place on the sequel is the scenery and atmosphere. Hades has some really incredible graphics and environments, with ties into mythology and its own spin on the looks of the underworld and its regions, all coated in excellent design and atmosphere. Hades 2, however, really knocks this one out of the park, like really well. There is so much detail in this game. The rooms are all decorated to incredibly high levels, the environments are lush and full of character and individuality, the portraits of the characters are just stunning, and the overall detail and settings, particle effects, design, it's all just honestly a step above Hades in many ways. And it runs pretty dang great too. I haven't experienced any frame rate stutters while playing even when on-screen effects got a little wild. Hades 2 really nailed the perfect visuals of a sequel, staying faithful to the look of the original with similar designs for recurring characters and settings while also upgrading the visuals we got in Hades and creating incredibly polished new designs, regions, and scenery to explore. Moving into the actual gameplay of Hades 2, there have been a ton of improvements on gameplay mechanics in Hades 2 as opposed to the original, as well as a slew of new gameplay and mechanics implemented into the game, with one such large one being the new magic system. Each weapon in Hades 2 has its own unique attack and special, as was the case in the first game. However, in Hades 2, holding your attack, special, or cast allows you to perform a unique charged attack, often dealing more damage or covering more area than their non-charged counterparts. This charge attack is regulated by the new magic mechanic. Each charge move takes a certain amount of magic to perform, with magic being supplied in a limited amount that can be replenished by entering a new room, by boons, and by certain permanent upgrades. This was one of the biggest additions to Hades 2, and even in early access they have near perfected its implementation. All of the various Omega attacks are unique to each weapon, and in each weapon they are unique apart from the weapon's standard attacks, adding a ton more dynamics to battle as you now have a total of 6 attacks in your arsenal as opposed to the 3 in Hades, as your new cast also has an Omega variant. Hades certainly had the player engage and thinking while in battle with its combats, but the new Omega attacks add even more of an element of control and engagement for the player. You now, on top of beating baddies with normal attacks, have to focus on your magic supply, decide where to allocate it, and do so all while mid-combat. The damage scaling makes it such that charge attacks are often required to deal enough damage to move through areas, meaning you're forced to allocate some thought into how you want to go about spending your limited magic supply. This mechanic also adds a bonus of more content surrounding it, with boons, permanent upgrades, and special area pickups having the potential to add various effects on your magic, notably with the new hex mechanic, which allows you to perform a certain chosen hex with a variety of effects after using a certain amount of magic, with its own entirely individual skill tree upgradable mid-run. All of this culminates in much more player-controlled and dynamic runs, and adds tons more content to play with in-game. It was a really awesome addition to the game, still allowing for similar feeling gameplay as we saw in Hades, but also adding a new fun twist to further enhance the great foundation of Hades' core gameplay, tethering right on that line of what a good sequel should provide. The new magic system isn't the only addition to Hades 2, however. A big new mechanic I've come to enjoy is the crafting and collecting. The original Hades had darkness, chthonic keys, gemstones, boss rewards, and keepsakes that the player could collect on a run and use in the hub to upgrade Zagreus' stats, open up accessibles in the underworld, and add various enhancements to Zagreus. Hades 2 took this system and expanded on it even more. Keepsakes and boss rewards return in Hades 2 with a full overhaul, but the game also has a plethora more collectibles that can be found in a run to be used in the hub. There's various plants, ores, bone, ashes, psyche, fate fabric, tears, wool, darkness, shadow, moon dust, you get the point. There's a lot more to collect in runs, and with that there is a couple new systems of using said materials, the cauldron and the altar. Hades had its Mirror of Nights, in which you could spend keys and darkness to upgrade Zagreus' stats, along with the House Contractor, where gemstones could be used to add new beneficial accessible places to the underworld and hub and generally aid you in your runs. In its stead, Hades 2 has the Cauldron and the Altar, which works similar to the Contractor and Mirror respectively with some key differences. The Cauldron lets you cast incantations, using various materials to add useful perks to your runs, open up certain things to access in your runs, and progress the story and gameplay. The new plethora of materials means that contrary to Hades, it takes a lot of prioritizing and rerunning to get all the incantations, as there are so many different material types to collect now. Most of the incantations are pretty satisfying to get, greatly helping you in your runs, and the necessity of a variety of different materials gives more meaning to runs as you have an additional secondary goal of get such and such on this run for this incantation, such that even if you die, the run could still be a success if you got the materials you needed for an incantation. Now, I do have one irk with the Cauldron, namely that there are some incantations that feel like they should just be basic things in the game from the start. There's a couple of incantations, Reviving a Mournful Husk and Reagan Sensing, which basically just point out if there's any materials to collect once you clear a room and map out the Fields of Mourning to make it easier to find the required upgrades needed to leave. I personally think that it's a little annoying to lock this stuff behind a wall, since it's not like really beneficial to helping you clear rooms or be stronger in any way, it's more of a quality of life thing. Before I had these incantations, I would often in my rush of clearing rooms miss a little glimmer of a plant or ore deposit or skip over the extra rewards in the Field of Mourning. And it was really annoying to do so, since there were so many materials that I always needed for incantations in the altar, and missing some in a run meant I would have to do another run just for a bit more myrtle or ash. While the central goal of my runs remained to get to Chronos, knowing that I was just a couple things away from a really useful upgrade made my new primary goal on the next run just get the thing I need and die on the spot, then retry to get to Chronos after I cast the incantation I needed, which I wouldn't have to do if I had the incantations that pointed out the materials I missed in the first run. I get that having these perks be unlockable gives more content to strive to unlock, they are not very expensive to get, and there's the wretched broker to buy extra materials from in a pinch. But since it does take a couple of runs to get the husk and sensing available to cast, you have to cast more incantations to get certain materials available for sale with the broker, and the husk and sensing themselves don't help in any way with beating a run, I feel like they should just be base game toggleable features. Moving over to the altar, it functions similar to the mirror from Hades, except this time you are presented with a variety of unlockable cards, each costing a certain amount of grasp, and you have a max amount of grasp that you can have at once, which is upgradable using Psyche. Each of the cards has a variety of useful benefits, akin to the mirror upgrades in Hades, but this time with a grasp limitation and some more diversity in effects. I really like this new system. In Hades, you weren't really restricted in your upgrades, save for how much darkness and keys you had, but here you're restricted in your upgrades by your grasp, which means that a lot more thought goes into what upgrades you want to take for a run. It's kinda like the charm system in Hollow Knight. It creates this whole customizable network of builds that are strong in certain areas and weaker in others, fully dependent on what you want to prioritize in your runs, making the permanent upgrades individually have a lot more meaning since you constantly swap in and out new combos based on what you have unlocked, how much grasp you have, and what you want to prioritize stat-wise. Even the less powerful cards are vital, as they may play a critical role in your specific build and help max out your grasp to get its full potential. There's even cards that require certain card combinations to use, further adding to the importance of each card and the thought that goes into how you want to divvy up your limited grasp among your cards. I really like this new direction with the altar. The greater option of choice adds more control to the player and gives more meaning to getting cards and materials for them aside from enter altar, spam upgrade until you're out of material, and move on. I hope this gets expanded more in the full release with new cards, since I can see myself potentially filling it out in like 100 or so hours, but even as it is, very good, me like. Backtracking a bit, with the new material collection system additionally comes a new tool system to complement. In Hades, you could take any of the permanent collectibles you found in your journey. However, in Hades 2, you have to have the correct tool to get certain material types. There's a pickaxe for ores, a rod for fishing, a tablet for psych, and a silver spade for seeds, with each such tool being unlockable and equipable in the hub right next to the weapon selection. Plants and other such materials can be picked up regardless of your tool, but several materials are unable to be gotten without a specific tool. This alludes to the prior point I made about the importance of prioritization in material collecting, as you can only take one tool at a time, and thus you really have to debate what incantations you need most and what materials you need for them. Hey, Future Frosif here. In the time it took me to script and record this video, an update was released for Hades 2 that completely changed how the tools work. Now when you unlock a certain tool, you always have access to that tool regardless of if it's equipped or not. Equipping a tool now just makes the material that the tool provides appear more often, and the other non-prioritized tool materials appear far less often. I had this whole spiel about how the old system, where you can only take one tool per run, was a bit too grindy at times due to the necessity of a wide variety of materials at any given time. But I guess you're safe from that whole rant now. However, I played a couple runs since the update, and I don't know if I'm just really unlucky, but I did not find any materials at all aside from the ones from my respective tool. So if appear less often means they appear as much as they do for me in those runs, I think they really need to bump up the spawn rates of other non-tool materials. Personally, I think all materials should spawn at a rate that having a tool spawns them, and prioritizing a tool makes said material spawn extra heavy as opposed to dampening the spawn of other materials. But the game's in early access, and maybe that will be implemented later. Okay, as you were, I'm gonna go crawl back to my cave and edit now. Moving into the new weapons, these were, for the most part, pretty great as expected. The weapons were a staple of Hades 1, and the variety of unique styles and boon interactions they had was a big reason the game was as fun as it was. Hades 2 continues this trend as well, with each of the weapons in the game providing a fun and unique combat experience for the player. Paired with the new Omega attacks, the weapons feel really fleshed out in Hades 2, with each being distinct from each other with a variety of attack options to provide multiple playstyles while also being pretty well balanced. My personal favorite as of now is the Moonstone Axe, cause I don't know, I just always run heavy weapons in games that give me the option. The absolute serotonin that releases when I is big. I haven't tried the Argent Skull yet, but every other weapon I've tried providing a fun and unique battle experience akin to the original Hades. Except for the Umbral Flames. I don't know if I'm really just that bad at the game or what, but my gosh, I just could not vibe with this weapon. The main issue I had was its attack damage felt really underwhelming compared to the other weapons in the game. Each weapon has differing raw attack stats, but in general, all of them felt equally balanced out pretty well in terms of their strength. Some, like the axe, just had longer attack animations but dealt heavier damage, while others, like the Sister Blades, attacked faster with less damage. It all mostly balanced out, but the attack of the Umbral Flames felt too slow for its damage, and the charge attack took a long time to charge up, like longer than most other attacks, for not that amazing damage. So my only reliable game plan with it was just stack the special a bunch and use attacks for procs only. I was also a bit annoyed at the inability to control your aim independent of your movements, as it practically forced me to have aim assist enabled to reliably hit my attack shots while also being able to freely move around. Minor qualm, it could just be a me thing, but I hope this weapon gets something of a change to its attack to balance it out. I like the long range type gameplay it encourages, and the special is good, so it would suck if I had to miss out on that just because of balancing. And speaking of balancing, this was the final big ticket item on my Hades 2 docket list. Hades very well walked the tightrope of difficulty with its manageable, challenging raw combat complemented by its heat system to further increase difficulty from there if things got a bit too easy or repetitive. In most every run, bar for some exceptions, I felt like I was learning and progressing more and more through the game. Whether that was through actual progress of getting closer to the surface or just learning more about the game and feeling like I was overall playing better, even if I died earlier than in a past run. It was one of Hades' most prominent qualities, combat that gave the player both a very high bar to achieve with its heat system, but also a more doable bar of beating Hades with no heat, albeit still with some work needed. Hades 2 honestly walks about a similar walk, which as I stated for storytelling, that is saying a lot. I've only met but not defeated Kronos yet at just about 10 hours of playtime, and not gonna lie, I was like kinda not the best at Hades and it's reflective in Hades 2, hence the sloth of errors visible in my background gameplay. But even so, I've continued to make considerable progress in getting farther in runs, upgrading Millennium, getting access to new areas, and generally getting a better feel for the game overall at a pace that is not too fast, as I've yet to finish a run, but also not so slow that I feel like giving up due to difficulty. So far, it's just about mirrored the pace set by Hades, and while I haven't quite gotten to the point of it, the game also has its own heat-like system in the form of fear, making guardian battles and overall runs more difficult with different adjustable modifiers which can also reap weapon aspect upgrade rewards for partaking in them. It's not a perfect system, of course, as this is a roguelike, and often winning a run can come down to luck of the draw with boons. But at least most of the time, deaths are a fault on my own account that I can improve later. And the general feeling of progression has been relatively constant, enough to keep me motivated to keep playing, but not too fast that I clear the content in the game too early. It is, in most regards, pretty perfect, bar some slight needed modifications that come with an early access title, namely including Eris. Eris is the youngest child of Nyx that will appear every time you first enter a new region, giving you a blessing that increases enemy damage by 20%. The way I understand it, she only appears once on your first ever encounter of a new region, and her blessing is removed after clearing the region you obtained the blessing in or by dying, and she is permanently gone after you've seen every region. I get that this is a very similar game to Hades 2, and some more skilled players than me would probably have already built pretty far into the fear system without Ares, considering they have essentially mastered the game having mastered Hades. But my gosh, the couple of runs that Ares popped up in felt genuinely winnable, until they got absolutely slapped by Ares' downgrade, which is pretty significant, basically a run-ender in my opinion. I feel personally like this is a bit of an odd and annoying way to deter progress. I understand where Supergiant are coming from, as the Hades masters with hundreds of hours of gameplay could potentially wipe the floor with Hades 2 after a run or two since the games play so similarly. But personally, I feel like the necessity of upgrades, randomization of boons, and uniqueness of Hades 2's gameplay, enemy combos, and guardians already deters this enough for most people. And maybe there's the super mega Hades players that play on another level that require Ares' boons to feel something of a challenge. But that's what the fear system is for. There's already a perfectly good system for ramping up difficulty. Enforcing increased difficulty on those who don't need it solely for those few who do need it feels a bit unfair, especially when the optional fear system that can cater well to both parties exists. Personally, I hope they remove Ares' blessing in the final game. I get what Supergiant is trying to do, but coming from the perspective of someone who does not play Hades nor Hades 2 on a very high level, it was very frustrating to have a potential winning run shut down by a random one-off difficulty increase. But aside from that, the balancing in Hades 2 I can confidently say is on the level of Hades, which by all means signals perfection in my book. Hi, Future Positive here again. So in that update I mentioned a bit ago, they also sort of fixed my whole Eris issue. She now is encountered less often, which I guess I was wrong about how often she appears because I thought she can only appear once per new region discovery, but this entails that she can appear multiple times or regularly, so my bad on that. And she now drops something of value when you encounter her, which I don't know what that is since I haven't run into her since my first couple of runs of the game ever. Not sure if this mystery drop is good enough to make her sort of more of a chaos boon, which I guess would be alright. But even still, she still has the same massive damage nerf as before, so I hold my belief that she is a very annoying and odd way to deter run progress, and they should just chop her off the final block of the game. I did read some consensus that she helps the story progression stay in order since it progresses in stages based on how far you get in a run, which is fair, but I think the error system is a little bit too aggressive. Like, maybe I'd get stopping the player from getting a full entire run on their first ever try, but error stopping you in every region is a tad bit much. I don't know, let me know your thoughts, but personally, I think she's gotta go. Okay, back to the editing cave again. Hades 2 has been an incredibly unique, refreshing, and just fun venture. It has truly cemented itself as both another Supergiant classic and an excellent example of what it means to be a good sequel. It founds itself on the adored Hades formula while also improving on it and adding its own unique identity to it, creating something that is both greatly familiar yet fascinatingly new at the same time. I really honestly forgot that this game is still in early access. In so many ways, it has already cemented itself as one of my top roguelikes, and met and exceeded my expectations for a sequel to Hades. The new gameplay mechanics, characters, and story, paired with the enhanced visuals, atmosphere, and world, combined into something arguably perfect. And I'm really excited to see where the game goes once it irons out some of its few kinks in the full release. But what do you all think of Hades 2? Is it really the smashing sequel I claim it to be? Has it truly adapted Hades into something just as, if not more amazing? Or is it faulted in ways that I overlooked in my hype for it? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you all next time.